Hey everybody, good morning. It is Wednesday, August 21st. Um, okay, so this is maybe going to be a quick video. And it's response to one of my videos from yesterday, which I thought was a good response, and I wanted to address it. And rather than typing out a big long response, I figured I'd just make a video as per usual. So for those of you who didn't see it, I posted a link to a video that I thought was a funny example of somebody being TE polar. And it was sort of coincidental because I had made another video yesterday talking about how being a carpenter is sort of the worst possible job for somebody who's like a TE polar INFJ or ISFJ. And then just sort of, I don't know, the Google algorithm caught me. And there's a video from somebody I follow where he was putting together something from IKEA. It was, to me, it was pretty funny. And to me, it was, you know, a good example of somebody who's TE polar. But this commenter raised the possibility that, maybe it's more of an SE polar thing. Um, and it's sort of it's not so much of a TE problem, but more of an SE problem. So I wanted to address that. Let's see here. So the comment, I'll just sort of paraphrase it here. That'd be more of an example of SE polar. They go on to say SE is capable of making sense of the function of objects. I agree in real time because my TI has always been fascinated by understanding construction, mechanical makeup, and things. Okay, that makes sense. So they're just saying that their TI helps them understand sort of mechanical, construction issues with objects. Okay, I'm all good with that. Maybe it's my ESTP ISTP shadow. Well, I don't know what your type is, and this is a video for another day, but I'm not into the whole shadow interpretation of things, but I'll explain that in another video. But I get what you're saying. Then they go on to say that they've got some INFP friends, who would presumably be SE polar, and they are clumsy at engaging with tools or repairing anything mechanical. So I think that's an important point. And I'll acknowledge that the video, the way that you view it, is a little bit of a Rorschach test, because putting together IKEA furniture is going to be both a TE task and an SE task, right? It's you're not really doing anything in a vacuum, and you've got the TE part of it and you have the SE part of it. And the Rorschach test to me is sort of, what is sort of funny about what's going on with this video. And I'll acknowledge and admit that, some of it's TE stuff and some of it's SE stuff. And I'll talk about that in a second. But I think it's important to make sure we distinguish, or at least I distinguish, what I'm talking about, the difference between TE and SE. And I've made other videos about this. Look for my planning versus action video, where I go into a lot more detail on this. But that's basically what I see the difference of TE and SE, where TE is the actual planning. Like, what do I have to do? What are the steps that I have to take to get from point A to point B or point Z? And I've got all this material that came out of this IKEA box, and I have to somehow take the current state of the world and get to my goal state, which is to have this table put together. So at the heart, that's a TE task. The SE part, though, is going to come into play with the actual interacting with the objects, taking the action to interact with them and to turn the screws and put the bolts on and stuff. And like the commenter said, when you're SE polar, that's more about being clumsy with interacting with the world, or being able to focus your attention on the sensory physical world and sort of coordinate your movements with that, right? So here's the example that I like to use. So I think of driving as both a TE task and an SE task. The TE part of it, assuming you know how to drive a car and you don't have to think about operationally how to drive a car, but let's just assume you know how to drive a car. The TE part of it is going to be, figuring out how to get, from where you are to where you're going. And again, assuming you're going somewhere new or something, and you have to take a long trip on the highway, and figuring out here's how I get to the highway. Once I get to the highway, I got to take this highway for X amount of time or X amount of miles. And then I got to take another highway. Then I have to get off and take some back roads. Then I got to take another highway. And it's that whole planning and mapping out, start here, then I go here, then I go here, then I go here. And you have to do it in sequential order. You can't just skip around, right? So that's going to be the TE part. The SE part is sort of paying attention in the here and now about where you are in the course of your plan, and and all the stuff that you've got to do while you're driving, right? Stopping at red lights, passing cars, all that kind of stuff, right? So that's going to be the SE part of it. And let's say you miss one of your exits when you're on the highway. Now, if it's because you were just blanking out and not paying attention, quote unquote, paying attention, to your sensory environment, and you were, off in NI or NE la la land and not just paying attention to where you are, that would be a breakdown in an SE process. But if you're sort of engaged and you see the sign that for the exit you're supposed to take, and you're registering it, but you just forgot, oh, that was the exit I was supposed to take, that would be more of a TE breakdown, right? And one thing that I always think of is, when I'm getting on, especially when you're getting on a tollway and you go through the toll booth, and there's sort of like you're getting on, let's say, Interstate 80, and you can go east or you can go west. You have to get on Interstate 80. You're right there, but it's a matter of, do you go east or west? My TE POLR part of me is always like, I always have to keep telling myself, okay, you're going 80 west, 80 west, 80 west. And I have to, keep that in sort of my working memory loop, because if I stop telling myself that, I'm just going to blank. And once I get to, do you go right or do you go left? Do you go east or do you go west? I'm going to have to stop and think about it. Okay, which way am I going? And again, I just see that as sort of a breakdown in the TE part of it, right? Like it's not a sensory part that's breaking down. It's the planning part. Which step do I take next? Okay, so back to the video. Again, it's a little bit of a Rorschach test. Like, clearly the guy is, the joke of it is that, this is sort of a taxing, exhausting task for the guy. But of course the joke is that he's just treating it very nonchalantly and as if he's, an expert at this, and that it all comes naturally to him. And so you sort of ask yourself, okay, well, what's the breakdown here? Is his attentional overload on the TE part of it, where he has to plan and organize his the steps that he needs to take along the way, like what you have to do when you're constructing this furniture. And even though he's got the directions, right, that tell him that, and I think that's part of the joke, right, is the fact that this is sort of a TE overload, but he's got the instructions right in front of him, and so he can use those as sort of a cheat code and sort of act like he's more competent and capable than he is. And that's, the sarcastic nature of the joke. And I hate to be one of those people who has to explain jokes to people, but but there are some SE funny parts about it, right? Like taking the wrong screw and putting it in the hole and then realizing, oh, that's the wrong screw, or putting something on backwards. That's probably an SE breakdown, like not paying attention to sort of the physical objects or the physical cues in space. But I would also argue that a lot of the SE breakdown is because you're so focused on the TE part of it, that you sort of lose track of the SE parts. And I'm just sort of speaking from experience, right? Whenever I have to like build furniture or follow instructions like that, it takes so much mental energy to have to follow these TE instructions that I'll do sort of mindless, absent-minded things because I'm just not paying attention to the SE part. And but admittedly, there are some SE breakdowns that are pretty funny. But to me, and again, this is the Rorschach test part of it, it's really the TE element that is sort of driving the joke. And if he really is an INFJ, that means he's going to be both TE polar and SE inferior, and that's just a recipe for disaster. And that's probably for doing these carpentry type tasks. And so that might be part of it as well. And I guess one way to think about it is, if you're trying to think, is this guy SE polar or TE polar? Obviously, this one video is not going to answer the question, but I think one way to think about it is if you had an INTP who's SE polar and an INFJ who's TE polar, and you took away the instructions, which type do you think is going to figure out how to build that table first? Now, of course, we have to get the INTP out of bed, right? To get them over their, inertia of not doing anything. But imagine you can, whip them into shape and, have them focus at the task at hand. And you say, okay, you take the INTP and the INFJ, or even an INFP. I'd put my money on the INFP as well. Now they're going to want some help, but they probably still figure it out before the INFJ if you took the instructions away, right? And the INFJ, I can just tell you from experience, is just never going to happen. Or if it does, it's going to take a really long time. The INTP would probably figure it out, right? And so that's why I see it as, but then, once they sort of get started, yeah, they might be a little clumsy with the tools. They might, break a piece here or there, but the overall structure, the overall game plan, they'll probably be able to figure out a lot quicker than the INFJ is going to be able to, right? And to me, just me personally watching it, that's what I found funny. That's what I found the humor in, is the fact that he was acting like, he was just completely competent and this was all a breeze, when deep down all of us know, we're all in on the joke, right? That he would have been completely out of his element without those instructions, and was probably felt completely out of his element anyways. So anywho, I appreciate the comment. I appreciate the fact that again, this is a Rorschach test. It sort of depends on what you're paying attention to and what you find is funny. And I do, and I'll acknowledge there's some messy, funny stuff in there as well. And if he really is an INFJ, I don't know. But if he really is, you're going to have both the SE inferior and the TE polar part of it. Okay, so thanks again for the comment. Thanks for stopping by. The person who left the comment, that was, I forget to mention, JL Track. Okay, thanks again. And hope to see you around some more. All right, see you. Bye.